What do you see when you think of a king? A glittering crown? A magnificent palace? Absolute power? Most of us think that. But what if I told you that all of that is just a facade for a much more terrifying truth? What if I told you that the crown is not a prize, but a cursed goal? And that the coronation is not a celebration, but the finish line of a terrifying obstacle course designed to crush the spirit of the one who dares to wear it? This is a story about the true price of power, a price paid not in gold, but in the soul. To understand that cost, we have to change the way we think. In the ancient world, the king was more than just a ruler. He was the kingdom's only link to the spirit world. He was the living antenna of his people. If the antenna was good, the signal was strong, the weather was good, the crops were good, the people were healthy. But if the antenna was weak, or worse, faulty, the signal was lost. Drought, famine, disease, and war followed. Putting the wrong person on the throne was more than a political mistake. It was a death sentence for the entire kingdom. So the choice of a king cannot be based on bloodline alone. It must be a rigorous selection, a job interview with the gods themselves. And that interview does not take place on red carpets, but in the dark, beginning with a ritual that few know about, the oath. Imagine the night before his coronation. The prince, who will become king tomorrow, is not in his luxurious bedchamber. He is taken to an ancient place, perhaps a cave or an old temple, where the air is cold and thick with the smell of time. He is stripped of his silks, his jewelry, and his title. Before the elders, he is a naked, trembling man. He is faced with an ancient stone altar. This was when he submitted his application. And the application was not written in ink. It was written in blood. He would take a small knife, cut a line in his hand, and let the drops of blood soak into the stone. The act was a pact. He was not asking for power for himself. He was making a sacrificial offer. His oath, translated in a modern language, would sound like this: God's spirits of the land, look upon me. Test me. If I am worthy, grant me the strength to protect this people. But if I am weak, if I am not the chosen one, then destroy me here and now, so that my weakness will not harm the people. It was a death wish if it was not worth it. A gamble in which he bet his own life for the safety of others. As the last drop of blood soaked into the stone, the silence of the darkness was his answer. The application had been accepted. The dreaded interview had officially begun. And the first test would require the almost impossible. He must stop being a man and become a living god. The application written in blood was accepted. The interview with the unseen forces began. And the first test was perhaps the most extravagant and daring in human history, transforming a mortal into a living god. This is where we come to the mighty Khmer Empire and the Devaraja, or Buddha King, ritual. A ritual designed to convince tens of thousands, and perhaps even the king himself, that he was no longer human. Why do such a thing? The answer lies in power. You can question a king. You could disagree with a king, but you cannot question a god. By making the king the earthly incarnation of Shiva, the Brahmin priests made a brilliant political move. From that moment on, every word the king spoke was a divine oracle. Any rebellion against the king was no longer treason, but blasphemy, an insult to heaven and earth. It created an absolute order, an unshakable stability, binding the kingdom to a single faith. And to make people believe this impossible, they built the greatest stage on earth. Angkor Wat. Imagine you are standing in the crowd that day. Before you is a giant man-made mountain made of stone, built to reach up to the heavens. At the top of that mountain, under the blazing sun, a figure appears. He is dressed in solid gold, shining like a god from a fairy tale. Thousands of voices around you chant in unison. The air is thick with incense and the sound of gongs and drums. Everything, from the architecture to the sounds to the images, is designed to overwhelm your senses, to make you feel small, and to plant in your mind a single thought. This man up there is no ordinary man. That was what the crowd saw. But now look through the eyes of the insider, of the future king himself. For him, it was the loneliest place in the world. It was like being the main actor in the most important play in history, but the play would never end. He would never be able to take off his makeup, never forget his lines. One small mistake, one cough, one hesitant glance, and the whole grand illusion could collapse. He had lost his right to be human. He was not allowed to tire, not allowed to doubt, not allowed to make mistakes. He was a prisoner of his own divinity. And here was the scariest thing that no one in the crowd knew. This ritual was also a real test. The priests were watching him, looking for a sign from the gods. If they felt the gods had accepted him, the ritual was successful. But if they felt he was unworthy, that the gods had rejected him, they would never say so. That would cause chaos. Instead, they would let him complete the ceremony. He would have the crown, he would have the throne, but he and the priests would know the truth. He would be a hollow god, a liar sitting on the throne, living in constant fear that one day the true gods would punish the entire kingdom for his hypocrisy. But even if he passed this test, his power was not yet complete. Ruling men was one thing, but a true king must be accepted by the land he ruled. And to do that, he must leave his golden temple to face a judge more wild and unpredictable than any man. Our king may have succeeded in convincing men that he was a god, but that was a play in a world of human creation. Now the real test begins. He must step out of his gilded temple, strip off the mantle of God, and face a power far more ancient and true, the spirit of the land. And the judge who represents that power is not a priest, but a wild beast. Why do such a dangerous thing? Because the ancients believed that the land, rivers, mountains, and forests all had souls. The land had been there for thousands of years before the kings, and it would be there for thousands of years to come. The land could give life to people with bountiful harvests, or it could bring death with drought and famine. A king could rule over people, but if he did not please the earth, he was just a man standing on a crumbling land. And to ask permission from the land, he had to speak to its ambassador. That ambassador could be a majestic lion, a cunning leopard, or a wise elephant. That animal was more than just a beast. It was the embodiment of the kingdom's soul. And this is when everything turned upside down. In the temple, he was a god looking down on humans. Here, on the step, he was a small man looking up at a beast. All power had changed. He was stripped of his royal clothes, without weapons, without guards. He was brought before the beast god in his most primal and vulnerable state. The purpose of this encounter is not to fight, but to ask permission. He must approach the animal slowly. His actions must show absolute respect, not fear, but certainly not defiance. The decisive moment is when he looks directly into the animal's eyes. No words are spoken, but a silent dialogue is taking place. With his eyes, he is asking the most important question. Am I worthy to care for this land? Do you accept me? The shamans and elders stood at a distance, watching with bated breath. They were the interpreters. They did not listen, they read. They read the animal's every little gesture. If the lion simply yawned lazily and lay still, if the leopard blinked slowly, it was a good sign. It was an agreement. The spirit of the earth had accepted the new ruler. But if the animal growled, wagged its tail angrily, or sprang to its feet in a position to attack, it was a clear rejection. And a refusal from a land is a death sentence for the dynasty. Even if he were to take the throne by force, he would be a king ruling over a cursed land. The trees would not bear fruit, the animals would flee, the rivers would dry up. His dynasty would fail before it even began. But our king succeeded. With humility and a spirit of harmony, he received the nod from the beast god. Mother Earth gave her permission. But a verbal agreement was not enough to seal a deal of this magnitude. To truly bind himself to the kingdom, to draw its power into his very veins, the new king must now sign the contract. In this contract, it would be signed in blood. The earth agreed. The spirit of the wild nodded its approval. But in the spiritual world, a verbal promise is like a passing wind. To make that promise a permanent contract, to bind the fate of the king to the fate of the kingdom, the contract had to be signed. And in the ancient world, the most sacred and lasting ink was blood. The next ritual is not for the faint of heart. But let us be clear. For the ancients, this was not an act of cruelty. It was a transfer of energy, a spiritual blood transfusion. They believed that blood contained the essence of life, containing all the strength and soul of a living being. To gain the power of the land, The king had to absorb the soul of an animal that represented the most abundant and vigorous element of that land, usually a large and powerful bull. In simple terms, he was being charged with the energy of Mother Earth. The ceremony was a solemn affair. The chosen animal was a perfect individual, revered as a divine being. Its death was not a slaughter, but a noble sacrifice to release the sacred energy within. When its warm blood was collected in a special vessel, it was no longer ordinary blood. It had become power in liquid form. The future king would kneel in a state of complete submission. The priest would dip his hand into the jar and begin to seal the contract onto the king's own body. The blood would be anointed on three important places. First, on his forehead, so that he could think with the wisdom of the heavens. Second, on his wrists, so that his every action would bring him strength and prosperity. And finally, on his feet, so that he would always stand firm and connected to the earth he ruled. As the warm blood touched his skin, it was believed that a primordial energy current was actually flowing into him, infusing him with strength and vitality. But here's the most important part, the clause that no one dares to forget. This energy is not a gift. It is a loan. Imagine that the king has just received a huge loan from an extremely powerful spiritual bank. His blood is the money, giving him the power to run the kingdom. But every loan has clauses, and the clause here is clear. He has borrowed a life to gain power, so he must use that power to create more life, bountiful crops, healthy people, a peaceful country. If he did, the loan would be renewed. But what if his reign was marred by failure, famine, and war? That would mean he had broken his contract. He was insolvent, and the spirit bank would come to collect. The price might be madness, disease, or the king's own life to appease the wrath of the gods. The dried blood on his body was more than a drawing. It was a terrifying reminder of the mortal debt he would always carry. Now, he was a living contract with the earth, filled with its primordial energy. But a new problem arose. This incredible power was being poured into an imperfect vessel. His body was still mortal, his mind still cluttered with his past. Before he could truly use this power, the vessel itself had to be made perfect. It had to be purified. So our king is now like a battery, charged with the primordial energy of Mother Earth. But there is a problem. This pure energy is contained in a dirty cup. That cup is his mind, and it still has many of the stains of a mortal's life: memories, pride, fear, and personal desires. In order to become a perfect channel for the will of the gods, this cup must be thoroughly cleaned. It must be completely emptied. This is where one of the most personal and profound rituals takes place, the sacred bath. And again, the purpose is not to wash away the dirt. The purpose is to perform a reset from scratch for the soul. The greatest sacrifice is not the life of an animal, but the sacrifice of one's own being. He must give up his past, give up everything that makes him who he is, to become a blank slate, an absolute and selfless instrument in the hands of the gods to serve the people. At midnight, the sacred hour between 2 days, he is taken to a deep forest spring or a sacred waterfall. This is the realm of the gods. The water here is not ordinary water. It is bone-chillingly cold, a shock to numb all earthly senses. And it is infused with esoteric herbs whose strong scents are said to lull the mind into a dreamlike state, detached from reality. Then the crucial moment came. He had to immerse himself completely in the water. While he was there, in the still world of water, the shamans on the shore began to chant. Their chants were not prayers, but instructions for him to let go. Imagine them whispering in his ear, "Let your mother's face float away. Let the name of your beloved fade away. Let your own name be carried away by the water. They're no longer yours." He had to consciously let every fragment of memory, every fragment of his identity, leave him and dissolve into the water. When he emerged from the water, the man was dead. A new man had been born. He no longer felt the noise in his head. Instead, there was a strange, profound silence. He was no longer Prince A or Duke B. He was simply the king, an empty vessel, a pure instrument. He had achieved absolute detachment by sacrificing his own ego. But an empty vessel, no matter how clean, is a fragile vessel. Was the new silence in his mind a sign of an unbreakable mental strength? Or was it merely a temporary peace that could shatter into madness at any moment? The next test would answer that question. It would plunge him into an even deeper silence, a silence that could crush a man's mind, just to see if this vessel was truly strong enough for what was to come. The king's mind was now a still lake, a blank sheet of paper. But was that stillness a strength or a terrifying void? A strong mind could find peace in silence, but a weak mind would be crushed by that very silence. The next test, the most brutal test of the spirit, was designed to find the answer. It was a journey into nothingness. Think of it as the ultimate test of endurance. A king is faced with endless pressure, wars, intrigue, decisions that affect millions of lives. If his mind can break down from silence, how can he handle a kingdom? So they have to push him to the limit. They have to put him in a psychological pressure cooker to see if he breaks. He was taken to a place of complete isolation, a dark underground cellar, a cave deep in the mountains. A heavy stone door was rolled in, blocking the only exit. The bang of the door closing was the last sound he heard from the outside world. Now he was alone in the pitch blackness and absolute silence. At first, the silence may be pleasant. It is a continuation of the peaceful feeling one gets after bathing in the holy water. But soon the human brain, starved of all external stimuli, begins to create its own reality. With nothing to see, the mind begins to paint pictures. With nothing to hear, it begins to whisper secrets. And the pictures, the whispers, were his deepest fears. The shadows began to dance, forming the shapes of monsters. He heard the voices of his old enemies, mocking his weakness. He heard the cries of his people, blaming him for disasters that had never happened. "You are not worthy," a voice said in his head. "You will fail," another whispered. The whole thing was a horror film projected to a single audience, and the theater was his mind. This was not a battle where he could use swords and spears. This was a battle fought in silence. Failure would mean believing in those visions. Failure would mean screaming, begging, pounding on the door in panic. The magicians outside were not waiting for the prophecy. They were waiting for a scream. A single scream would mean the jar had been broken. The test was over. He had failed, but success is silence. If he can sit still in the midst of that storm of illusion, look his own demons in the face, and calmly recognize them as tricks of the mind, he will win. By overcoming them, he proves that his mind is not a fragile vessel, but a fortress of steel. He has conquered the most terrifying world, the world within himself. He had faced the void and remained steadfast. The mind vessel had proven pure, empty, and utterly solid. Everything was ready. Now it was time to fill the vessel. It was time to connect him to the kingdom's ancient batteries, the sacred objects that contain the power of all the kings who had come before him. Our candidate has gone through it all. He has sworn an oath in the dark, faced the beast, signed a blood contract, erased his identity, and conquered the demon in his own mind. His body is fully charged. His mind is now a pure, solid, and empty vessel. He is completely ready. The final step before being presented to the people is the moment of activation. The moment he is connected to the source code of power of the entire kingdom. And that source code is not an abstract idea. It exists in physical form. It is the divine objects or royal relics. We often think of things like crowns, scepters, and thrones as mere symbols of power. But the ancients did not think so. For them, these objects were power. They were batteries of energy, accumulating strength and wisdom over dozens of generations of kings. A king's life is short, but a kingdom is eternal. These sacred objects are where the kingdom's power is kept over time. And this is where we have to think backwards again to see the truth. We think that the king uses the scepter. But what if the truth is the scepter is using the king? The king does not give the relics power. It is the relics with the souls of all the kings before them contained within that are giving him power. He is simply a living conduit, a person chosen to activate and use that ancient energy for a certain period of time. The activation ceremony takes place in a secret vault where the most sacred treasures are kept. The air here is thick with the energy of centuries. The high priest will lead him before the holy relics. It could be a throne carved from an ancient tree struck by lightning, which is said to be still warm to the touch. It could be a sword forged from meteorite, which feels heavy not from weight, but from responsibility. Or it could be a crown, which seems to radiate a faint light of its own. The moment of truth has come. When the future king places his hand on the sword, or sits down on the throne for the first time, or the priest slowly places the crown on his head, a huge transfer of energy takes place. Imagine a painless bolt of lightning flooding his body. His empty mind is suddenly filled with the knowledge and experience of hundreds of kings who have gone before him. He sees the battles of an ancestral king. He feels the pain of a king when his country is in great trouble. He learns the lessons of diplomacy, of governance, of sacrifice. He is no longer an individual. He has become the sum of a dynasty. The transformation is complete. The man who entered this trial has truly disappeared. The empty vessel has been filled with the energy of the earth, the stability of the indestructible mind, and the wisdom of the ancestors. A new being, the king, has truly been born. The secret work is done. The spiritual alchemy is finished. The mortal has been remade into a king. Now it is time to raise the curtain and present this new creation to the waiting people, who pray that this dangerous transition will be a success. The secret work was done. Behind the closed doors of the temple, in the darkness of the caves, a man had been systematically dismantled and reassembled. He had been tested by the gods, by nature, and by his own mind. He had passed them all. The final product was ready. But all this would have been for naught if the people had not accepted it. The final rite was not a secret. It was the most public of rites, the official coronation. And this is the last time we use reverse thinking. We think this is a party to introduce the new king. But it's not. This is a product launch, a show. The purpose is Topper Vito show the people that the dangerous transition had been successful. It was a moment when the whole kingdom breathed a collective sigh of relief. The people had been waiting anxiously. They knew, even if they did not know the details, that the transition of power was always the most fragile and dangerous time. They were waiting for reassurance that the gods had not abandoned them, that the kingdom had a worthy protector. Then the moment came. The great doors of the palace opened slowly. Thousands of people held their breath, and then a man stepped out. But it was not the prince they knew. There was a change in his eyes, in his posture. He walked with a strange dignity and dignity. People did not see just a man in fine clothes. They saw something different. He exuded a quiet, unshakable authority. He did not need to strain to appear powerful. He was power incarnate. The crowd erupted in cheers. But it wasn't just a cheer of duty. It was a giant sigh of relief from an entire nation. They could see change. They can feel they realized that the person standing before them was no longer just a man, but their protector, their king, their living connection to the divine world. Their cheers were the final confirmation. We accept you. The transfer has been successful. We are safe. The moment the crown was publicly placed upon his head was merely the final seal. It formalized the invisible contract between the king and his people. His reign did not truly begin when the crown touched his hair. It had begun many days earlier in the dark with an oath of blood. This public ceremony was simply a solemn announcement that the sacred and dangerous work had been completed. The man was gone. The king now ruled, not by birthright, but by a right granted through terrible trials and a covenant with the unseen world. And so the story of the mystical coronations ends. The great empires have fallen. The ancient spells have been forgotten. Today, we no longer ask our leaders to face the beasts in the cave or fight the demons in their own minds. We have electoral systems, debates, ballots. It is a world of reason, of law, of numbers. But when we look back at these ancient rituals, we see more than just superstition. We see a profound understanding of human psychology and of the burdens of power. These were systems designed not just to elect a ruler, but to create an ideal ruler, one who has sacrificed his ego, one who has a will of steel, and one who is bound by sacred oath to serve his people. Perhaps we have achieved a lot in the modern world, but perhaps we have also lost something. We have lost the idea that leadership is not just a job, but a sacred calling. That power is not just about ruling, but about taking charge. So the ghosts of these mystical coronations still lurk somewhere behind the seats of power today. They whisper an eternal reminder of the true, terrifying price of daring to wear a crown.